Viewpoints. This meeting will be held in hybrid format with some members in the Senedd chamber and others joining by video conference. All members participating in proceedings of the Senedd, wherever they may be, will be treated equally. A plenary meeting held using video conference in accordance with the standing orders of the Welsh Parliament constitutes Senedd proceedings for the purposes of the Government of Wales Act 2006. Some of the provisions of Standing Order 34 will apply for today's plenary meeting, and these are noted on your agenda. I would remind members that standing orders relating to order in plenary meetings apply to this meeting and apply equally to members in the chamber as they do to those joining virtually. The first item, therefore, is questions to the First Minister, and the first question is from Andrew Davies.
Presiding Officer, will the First Minister make a statement on Welsh Government economic projections for 2021 in South Wales Central?
The Chief Economist's report, to be published alongside the budget, will provide an assessment of economic prospects in all parts of Wales.
Thank you, First Minister, for that answer. 2 weeks ago, obviously, Welsh Government brought forward the business development grant that had to be suspended after 24 hours. I appreciate that does show a sign of demand out in the economy, and in particular in South Wales Central. As a regional member, I've been contacted by businesses across the region who obviously found it very frustrating after putting a huge amount of time and effort into their plans that the scheme was either suspended or oversubscribed, depending on which message you received. Can you give any confidence that those businesses that were unfortunate enough not to get in before that 24-hour deadline closed will be able to resubmit their bids in the coming weeks and months ahead and gain that support to take them into 2021 from the Welsh Government?
We thank Andrew Davies for that supplementary question. And, of course, he is right that there are many businesses in South Wales Central and in other parts of Wales who've looked to the third phase of the Economic Resilience Fund for assistance. In terms of the £200 million lockdown business grants, 22,000 grants worth over £61 million have already been paid out. And in relation to the £100 million business development grant aspect, where there were 6,000 applicants on that first day, hundreds of payments have already been made and millions of pounds have already been paid out. We are, of course, looking to see whether it is possible by drawing funds from other parts of the ERF, where maybe the demand hasn't been so great, or looking to see what possibilities there may be later in the year to supplement the business development grant strand of Phase 3 in order to allow other businesses who weren't able to get their application in that first 6,000 to benefit further from the fund.
Mick Antonev.
First Minister, we don't have any clarity or certainty yet whether the UK government is going to be able to negotiate an EU trade agreement, and we don't know whether there's going to be any further support for businesses. We see that sectors like the aviation sector in my constituency have been abandoned by the UK government. We've lost jobs in avionics, BAMC, GE, and many others. And at the same time, the UK government is rolling over a whole series of trade agreements internationally, but very little scrutiny, if any at all, in Westminster, and this is causing controversy. And I'm wondering what steps are being taken by the Welsh Government to ensure that Welsh interests are protected in those trade agreements, because they do affect Welsh manufacturing, Welsh agriculture, and ultimately Welsh jobs.
So I thank Mick Antonev for that. He's right to point to the absence of sector-specific assistance in some very important parts of the Welsh economy. Steel is uppermost in our minds at this point, given Friday's announcement, and it really is imperative that the UK government come to the table with a sector deal for steel that will protect jobs here in Wales, but also protect the UK economy. If Britain is to be a globally trading nation, then we can't expect to do that without as foundational a sector as steel available indigenously within the United Kingdom. Of course, Mick Antonev is right, Llywydd, that the UK government is using prerogative powers in Parliament as a way of bypassing scrutiny on trade deals, and no wonder that they are in trouble on that. Constitutionally, surely they want to involve devolved governments in those discussions and not to rely on brute constitutional force in order to impose deals on other parts of the UK, which we could have helped in a constructive way by providing the information that we have and they don't, to make those trade deals suitable for all parts of the country. I agree with Mick Anthony that at the heart of this is a set of underlying attitudes towards devolution in the United Kingdom, as we saw so spectacularly with the Prime Minister's very ill-judged comments overnight.
Question 2, David Rees.
What action is the Welsh Government taking to secure funding for programmes currently funded by the EU through structural funds?
Thank Iris for that question. Llywydd, the promise that Wales would not be a penny worse off by leaving the European Union has met with little success. The UK Government has refused to negotiate continuing participation in interterritorial cooperation programmes, for example, worth over €100 million to Wales. The Welsh Affairs Select Committee describes progress on the Shared Prosperity Fund as negligible.
Well, thank you for that answer, First Minister. Many communities across my constituency have benefited from projects which have been funded by the European Union through structural funds. Whether it's been skills-based, they would never have been able to receive otherwise, but these communities are now developing as a consequence of that. Now, as you say, we were promised not a penny lost at the time, but the Shared Prosperity Fund still seems to be lacking total detail, and I'm hearing, in fact, that they may well wish to bypass Welsh Government in that funding. Now, given the comments made by the Prime Minister last night, is it worrying that this Shared Prosperity Fund may therefore not deliver the same type of programmes that will help our communities, and in fact will keep the projects that the Tory Government in Westminster want and nothing else?
Well, Llywydd, that is a major concern for not just the Welsh Government, but all the partners that we have across Wales and who have worked with us so carefully, led very often by our colleague Hugh Davis, in order to devise a regional economic strategy for Wales that will make use of the replacement funds that we were told were guaranteed to be available to us. Now, I quoted the Welsh Affairs Select Committee, Llywydd. I do so because it has a Conservative majority and a Conservative chair from Wales, and this is what they said about it. The UK Government, they said, announced as far back as 2017 that it intended to replace EU funding with a Shared Prosperity Fund. Yet details remain scant on key aspects, including how much Wales will receive under the new arrangements, how it will be administered, and to whom it will be targeted. Its repeated promises of a consultation have failed to materialise, progress has been negligible, and it demonstrates a lack of priority. Well, that simply isn't good enough. These are major issues that matter in every part of Wales, including, as Diary said, in his constituency. People in Wales are entitled to know that the promise that was made to them is going to be kept, not a penny less and not a power stolen. And that's what we will be holding the UK Government to account over.
Nick Ramsey.
Diolch, Llywydd. First Minister, I wanted to ask you about what can we learn from the Scottish example. EU funds have in the past been used to invest in infrastructure, as we know, and as Dave Rees has just alluded to. Do you share my view that our National Infrastructure Commission could not only learn some valuable lessons from the experiences in Scotland, where their commission is committed to being outward-looking, forward-thinking and innovative, but we could radically rethink our strategy to attract investment in Wales as we move out of the pandemic, grow back greener, however you want to describe it. There are ways to work differently in the future and make the most of the funds that we do have.
Llywydd, well, I'm very happy always to learn from lessons elsewhere. Part of the huge benefit of being members of the European Union has been that it has allowed us to learn from the experience of other member states in the way that they have deployed European funding, as they have in turn learnt from Wales about some of the ways that we have done things here. And where there are good examples elsewhere inside the United Kingdom, then the Welsh Government is always open to learning from experiences that can help us to make the most of the funding that we have. The problem is we don't know the funding and we don't know how it's going to be used.
Caroline Jones.
Diolch, Llywydd. First Minister, many businesses in Wales felt that past EU structural funding programmes were held back by far too many rules and overly bureaucratic processes. And as a result, some programmes failed to deliver upon their stated aims, namely to raise the economic prosperity of Wales and our people. So, First Minister, what discussions have you had with the UK Government about ensuring replacement structural funding programmes are flexible and responsive to the needs of Welsh businesses and the Welsh population?
Well, Llywydd, it's one of the sadnesses that we've had almost no opportunities at all to have those conversations. My colleague Jeremy Miles, who leads for the Welsh Government on these matters, wrote to the Minister said to be responsible for the Shared Prosperity Fund back in October, asking for meetings with UK Government ministers in order to be able to contribute some of our thinking and to take advantage of some of the flexibilities that could be there in the future. A meeting was never provided. We've had one meeting with the Secretary of State for Wales, who promises us further meetings once the Chancellor makes his statement on the 25th of November, but that's just not good enough. We want to have discussions before the announcement is made, not after it. In that case, we might be able to do some of the things that Caroline Jones was referring to, because I think we have always said that the other side of the European Union, there may be more flexibilities. We may be able to use the money differently geographically. We may be able to draw in other funds in a way that you can't within the European Union. We may be able to use money for purposes that the EU rules did not allow us to use the money for here in Wales. There are some opportunities here. We have identified them with our partners. We would like to have had an opportunity to share that with the UK Government, and despite asking for those opportunities, they have never come our way.
Questions now from the party leaders. Leader of the Welsh Conservatives, Paul Davies.
Diolch, Llywydd. First Minister, from the start of this week, people on low incomes in Wales will be able to claim £500 if they have to stay off work and self-isolate due to COVID-19. I'm pleased to see that those payments will now be backdated to the 23rd of October. However, it remains the case that local authorities in Scotland and in England have been delivering the grants for some weeks and backdating them to the 28th of September. Now, the Health Minister has made it clear that Wales's payments have been delayed because the Welsh Government has had a practical challenge in getting all of our systems in place to make this work. Can you tell us what those practical challenges are? And can you also tell us why the Welsh Government isn't backdating the payments to September, like in other parts of the UK, as surely this means that people on low incomes in Wales will be financially disadvantaged compared to people in England and in Scotland?
Well, we backdate to the 23rd of October because that is when the fire break period was introduced in Wales, and that gives us a reason for doing that. The purpose of the £500 is to assist people to self-isolate. It's no assistance to people to do that if the period of self-isolation has already been completed many, many weeks ago. The practical challenges are in designing a system that is not open to fraud. Because we cannot have a system in which people simply self-declare that they have been asked to self-isolate and then claim £500 of public money. We need to be certain that if people get the £500, as we want them to do, because we want people to be able to self-isolate, then we need to know that those people have been asked to do so by our TTP system and therefore are bona fide claimants of this public money.
Well, First Minister, it's absolutely crucial that those who need additional support throughout the pandemic have actually access to it, whether that's financial support for someone living on a low income that has to self-isolate, additional guidance and support for those who were previously on the shielding list, or mental health support for those who simply don't feel like they're entitled to it. Now, First Minister, I'm sure you'll share my concerns to the news that a recent Mind Cymru survey found a third of adults and a quarter of young people failed to get help because they didn't think they deserved it. As you know, it's so important that intervention is provided as early as possible to stop some conditions escalating and substantially improve outcomes for patients. You've recently reshuffled your cabinet, which now recognises mental health as a significant policy area. Therefore, can you tell us how the Welsh Government is responding to concerns from organisations like Mind Cymru about ensuring people are getting the help that they need? And what further action can the Welsh Government take to better communicate to people the importance of reaching out and accessing mental health support and services if they are struggling to cope during the pandemic?
Well, Llywydd, let me begin by agreeing with Paul Davies that getting the help you need for people who feel the pressure of these extraordinary months in their sense of mental health and well-being is very important indeed. And there is something for us all to think about in that result, that people hadn't failed to get help in the sense they'd asked for it and help wasn't available. They hadn't gone looking for help because they somehow didn't feel that they were in the right place to do so. That means I think that we have to make sure we have as varied a repertoire of assistance for people as we can devise, because people who need help for mental health and mental well-being will want to access that help in a whole variety of ways. One of the ways in which we have been able to do more is by funding Mind Cymru itself. I think that was the latest announcement that we've made in £10 million worth of additional investment in mental health services during the pandemic, because Mind operates at a community level. So it doesn't provide services to people who have acute psychotic conditions, but it does provide help to people who are just looking for that bit of additional support and advice and guidance where community-based services can be the most significant. And in that way, we are doing our best to try to make those services as available as possible to break down barriers that people may feel, to make sure they get that crucial support. Let me just put one point to the member, however, because he's referred twice so far to the crucial need for people to get the support that they need. This government, with others, have been lobbying the UK government to make sure that 35% of all families in Wales below pensionable age do not lose over £1,000 when the Chancellor withdraws the £20 a week that has been added to universal credit during this pandemic. I wonder if he'd like to add his name to that call today, because that is genuinely crucial support that families in Wales no longer know that they can rely on.
Well, I know that, First Minister, you want to distract from talking about your responsibilities as a government in order to avoid highlighting your failures.
Just try.
Your failures when
just
it comes
try.
to the health service, your failures when it comes to the education system, and your failures when it comes to the economy. Now, First Minister, figures today show that 23 deaths were registered in care homes, almost triple the amount registered last week, which is a significant cause for concern. And yet figures still aren't available to confirm exactly how many care homes in Wales are directly affected by COVID-19 and how many residents in Wales, so that the Welsh Government can support care settings more effectively. Now, you'll be aware of the delays that some care home residents and staff have faced in getting test results back quickly. And there's also been concern over the high rate of false positive test results that has also added significant pressure to the sector. And we now know that people were discharged from hospital into care homes within days of receiving a positive COVID test, which I know you will agree is unacceptable. So, First Minister, as the challenges facing care homes across Wales continue, can you tell us how many care home residents and staff have been affected by COVID-19 in Wales? Can you also tell us what the Welsh Government is doing to turn around the time it takes care home staff and residents to get their COVID test results, and how it's addressing the issue of false positive tests? And given that the Welsh Government has commissioned further analysis of the discharge figures, can you tell us what further interventions are being considered to support care home residents and staff throughout this pandemic?
Well, Llywydd, this second wave of coronavirus has had an impact on care homes here in Wales, despite the very careful preparation that the sector made during the summer. The additional investment that the Welsh Government has made in that as well. This is a deadly and highly infectious disease. And as levels of coronavirus in the community rise, so the threats to closed communities such as hospitals and care homes rises as well. And it's a very sad number that the member referred to at the start of his question. As to test results, the delays in test results are almost exclusively from the Lighthouse Lab system, and those are not in our hands, although performance there has improved in the last 3 weeks, and we look to that system to go on improving. When there is a positive case, then we use the Welsh system, because that does get people results back within 24 or 48 hours, and we'll continue to do that. The false positive issue, I'm afraid, is not that significant an issue at the moment. False positives happen when there's very low levels of coronavirus. As the levels of coronavirus rise, then false positives don't occur in the same way. So at the moment, it is not a problem that is the most significant one we face in the care home sector. It was a particular problem when levels of coronavirus were at their lowest ebb amongst care home staff, where positive results did turn out often not to be genuine. But I'm afraid as the numbers rise, then that is not the problem that it used to be. As to the point that the member raised about people discharged from care homes, discharged from hospital into care homes, there is a lot more analysis that is needed of those figures to make proper sense of them. We don't know where those tests were carried out. It is possible they were carried out in the care home to which the person who lives in that care home was being returned. It is possible that it happened not in the hospital episode before someone was discharged back into the care home, but in a previous hospital episode. So there are important things that we need to learn about where the tests were carried out, when they were carried out, and what impact they may have had. That is why we have said that we will carry out further analysis of the figures that were published yesterday, and I think it would be sensible for anybody to wait. The member has been very keen on data in previous weeks in this chamber. I think he would be wise to wait until we have that extra data before we draw any conclusions. To end, Llywydd, by going back to the point I made to the member, he could have offered us a simple yes, couldn't he? He could simply have said that in the crucial support that he was keen to ask me about earlier, that the £1,000 and more that 35% of families in Wales are about to lose, he might just have added his voice to those of us who would like to persuade the Chancellor not to allow that to happen.
Adam Price.
First Minister, according to media reports, Tata Steel UK is currently seeking £500 million of funding from the UK Government as part of the Project Birch initiative in order to sustain its future. Accepting this support, it's said, will require Tata to close both its 2 blast furnaces at Port Talbot and replace them with electric arc furnaces that will produce steel from scrap rather than iron ore. While this will reduce the emission of greenhouse gases in Wales, it will also lead to very significant redundancies among the steelworks employees. If this happens, history tells us that the probability of the re-establishment when clean technology becomes available is small, and Wales will have lost a vital part of its industrial base. Would you agree that a policy of reducing UK greenhouse gases while increasing them in other countries via imports at the expense of Welsh workers' jobs would represent a short-term fix rather than a genuinely sustainable industrial strategy, and is the very opposite of a just transition to a decarbonised future?
Well, I'm happy to agree with the final point that the member raised. I'm not prepared to follow the path down which he made his argument. It is very important that we do not talk about steelmaking in Port Talbot as it is carried out today, as though it has already been lost. And the company I know is very keen indeed that we don't talk about it in that way, because it has customers that it is supplying, it has order books that it needs to fulfil. So I am committed to doing everything the Welsh Government can do to help create a sustainable future for steelmaking in the United Kingdom and here in Wales. That can only be secured through proper discussions between the UK Government and the company. And it's a matter of great disappointment that it has not happened properly already, and may have contributed to the decisions that the company has made, the fact that they've not been able to secure an agreement through Project Birch, despite many months of trying to persuade the UK Government to do so. I don't think any of us are in a position to know what the outcome of that will be. And I don't think we should talk about it in a way that undermines the company's current ability to go on trading, to go on providing jobs in Port Talbot and to secure a future for that community.
History has taught us as well, hasn't it, First Minister, we cannot rely on Westminster to solve Wales's economic problems, and indeed to reverse the Prime Minister's logic. It's because Westminster's proven so disastrous to Wales that this Senedd exists. So now is the time to show the difference that having our own government can make by bringing forward a counter proposal to protect jobs and livelihoods in Port Talbot and the surrounding area, including the protection of primary steelmaking. The UK government is reportedly being asked to part-nationalise the company. Isn't it even more important that the Welsh Government takes a stake in a company that is overwhelmingly Welsh-based in terms of its workforce, so those workers and their communities have a seat at the table? And can you confirm that you would be prepared to do so? And can you confirm that you're also developing a fully-fledged alternative strategy for Port Talbot based around maintaining the works in their current configuration in the short to medium term, investing in the development of hydrogen-based steel production in Wales, and ensuring that the Port Talbot works is converted to use the new technology to produce carbon-neutral steel by 2035?
Well, Llywydd, the Senedd exists not because of the failure of the Boris Johnson government, but because of the success of a Labour government in making devolution happen in the first place. And, you know, devolution thrives when there is a Labour government to support it, and devolution comes under the sorts of pressures that it is now under when we have a Conservative government where you scratch the surface of the Conservative Party and all its old hostility to devolution rises back to the surface. That's what happened yesterday when the Prime Minister thought he could show off in front of a few Conservative MPs from the north of England. But we have the Senedd because of a Labour Party, and this Labour Party will continue to make sure that we use all the powers that we have here, all the powers we have of persuasion, the powers that we have to intervene, not at this point to make a counter-proposal, but to work with the company on the proposals that it will want to bring forward. And we have a part to play in that, and part of what we bring to the table were the points that Adam Price made towards the end of his second question, because we do want to see a carbon-neutral steel industry here in Wales. We do want to see that as soon as possible. It is why the Steel Institute that we are creating as part of the Swansea City deal is so important to the future of the steel industry here in Wales, because it will bring all the power of research from the university in Swansea, all the power of the local authorities with the interest that they have in making the steelworks a success, to help to create the type of future for the steel industry that we want to see. We will play our part in that, not at this point by developing counter-proposals, but by trying to make sure that the company and the UK government are able to get together with the assistance that we can provide to fashion a way forward for that industry.
Do you agree, First Minister, the only secure and sustainable future for Port Talbot and the other Welsh plants in the long run is to return the ownership of the Welsh steel industry to Welsh hands, to nationalise as a first step and then recapitalise to the kind of green bond advocated recently by the OECD in their report to you, and then finally to mutualise and create a Welsh steel cooperative? And Dŵr Cymru has been a success despite the scepticism at the outset, so why not Dir Cymru? The Basque cooperative Mondragon, which the Welsh Government is already working with, as you confirmed last week, has previously indicated its willingness to provide advice and support in establishing an employee-owned business at Port Talbot. Why not take them up on that offer? A worker-owned integrated steel plant is by no means unprecedented internationally. At the height of the last crisis, which was only 4 years ago, the Welsh Government funded the Excalibur management buyout at Port Talbot to the tune of £750,000. Is the Welsh Government prepared to put similar resources and energy now behind the idea of a Welsh-owned steel cooperative?
Well, what we will do, Clywyd, as I've said, is to put our energy and our commitment to the steel industry in Wales at the service of the company and the UK government in the discussions that they need to have. That is the way future. That is the way forward for this industry at this point. Now, there are many things that Adam Price said to which I am myself attracted. I had the privilege of spending a week in Mondragon while a member of this Senedd and saw the fantastic work that has been achieved there. And I think I said last week, Llywyd, that I'd received a letter from the President of the Basque Country that day inviting Welsh ministers to further discussions with the Basque Government about mutual ways in which we can learn from one another, help one another. But on the narrow point of what needs to happen next in relation to the very important steel industry and its impact on communities here in Wales, the efforts of the Welsh Government are not going to be distracted into alternatives. At this point, our efforts are concentrated on discussions with a company, persuading the UK Government, getting them properly around the table, finding a way forward that protects those communities and those jobs.
Question 3, Leanne Wood.
What is the Welsh Government doing to mitigate the impact of coronavirus on people's health in the Rhondda?
Can I thank Leanne Wood for that question? We work with partners in employment, mental health, non-coronavirus health needs, and in combating coronavirus itself to mitigate all the health harms in the lives of people in the Rhondda. In recent days, both incidence and positivity rates in the area have fallen as a result of the combined efforts of local services and local people.
The coronavirus isolation scheme has finally opened after much delay, but it will not provide much comfort for the parents of children who have to self-isolate. Only people formally told to isolate by the track and trace teams are eligible for payment, and this is no good for a parent without childcare who has to take time off work to look after a child who's been ordered to stay at home. There's also no right of appeal if an application is refused. Given the discretionary assistance fund is usually only applicable to people without savings and facing destitution, and that very few employers give paid leave to people to look after children, many parents will be facing poverty by the inflexibility of the coronavirus self-isolation scheme as it's applied in Wales. I keep arguing, First Minister, that you need to make it as easy as possible to enable people to self-isolate. So how are you going to remedy this particular problem?
Well, Llywyd, I'm happy to look at the points that the member has raised, of course, and if there are things that we can do that will make the scheme fit better with individual circumstances of the sort she described, then I'm very happy that we should do so. We've put £5 million further into the discretionary assistance fund here in Wales to allow it to be able to respond to the coronavirus-induced difficulties that families in Wales experience. And we have already made thousands of payments through that fund, and millions of pounds have been allocated to families in Wales to help with coronavirus-related needs. And that will now include needs of families who need to self-isolate. And the word discretionary assistance fund is there for a reason. It is there to enable the decision makers to take into account the specific circumstances of individuals and families who make an application to that fund. So it is not a rigid, rule-based system. It operates within a framework that is fair to people and then allows decision makers to exercise their discretion so the unique set of circumstances in front of them can be properly attended to. If there is more that we can do as experience of the £500 emerges, and particularly if we need to fine-tune it to make sure that the needs of children are taken into account, then I'm happy to say to the member that I'm very willing to do so.
David Melding.
First Minister, many areas in the former South Wales coalfield, like the Rhondda, have had a very high level of infection, and the population there will be sick for some time to come with long COVID and other related problems afterwards. And I'm particularly concerned about how this is going to be managed, what health services and clinics will be available for people, especially if it reduces their ability to hold down a job or to seek a job, given the economic inactivity that areas like the Rhondda currently suffer.
Well, those are very important points that the member makes. He's absolutely right that in the early months of coronavirus, people living in deprived communities experienced mortality rates almost double those in less deprived areas, and we certainly saw the effect of that in the Rhondda Cynon local authority area. The first thing we have to do is to get on top of the impact that the current second wave is having on our hospital services, because at the moment our hospitals are having to deal with the immediate crisis of more people coming through the door for this reason, and that inevitably has an impact on their ability to go on providing other services such as the rehabilitation services to which David Melding referred. I know that he will be glad to have seen the fall in the incidence rate in RCT over the last 7 days. A week ago, it was 478 per 100,000 in the population. Today, it's 259. The positivity rate has fallen from over 25% to 18%. And in the last couple of days, in hospitals in the RCT area, there are now 14 confirmed cases in critical care. That's the lowest since the 27th of October. There are 206 confirmed cases in other acute beds in the Cwm Taf Morgannwg Health Board area. That's 50 lower than the same day last week and 64 lower than the highest point, which was on the 3rd of November. And it's provided we can go on bearing down on the current flare-up of numbers, that the Health Board will then have the capacity to be able to attend to the longer-term consequences, which I agree with the point that David Melding was making, that if you have an older, sicker, poorer population, then those long-term impacts are likely to be more profound.
Cwestiwn 4, Hugh Ranka Davies.
What assessment has the First Minister made of the impact that the result of the US presidential elections will have on Welsh Government's international strategy?
As our international strategy outlines, the USA is a priority relationship for Wales and is vitally important to our economy. I have written to both the President-elect and the Vice President-elect to congratulate them on their victory and to convey our renewed commitment to forge even closer links based on shared values and mutual interests.
I thank the First Minister for that positive and constructive response. And I'm sure, like me, he would welcome the fact that it looks as though we're going to have a proactive, engaged, constructive partner now, willing to play its role on the global stage, including by rejoining the World Health Organization and dealing with the global pandemic, and by recommitting to the Paris Agreement and actually taking a full and active role in COP26 coming up. But could I ask the First Minister, what does he think we can do even more on the diplomatic, the economic, the social, the cultural ties? And what will the US presidency bring us in terms of perhaps things that we're not thinking so much about, like the attitude to trade and EU relations being currently negotiated by the UK government, and also the Belfast Agreement, the peace process, which was, you know, we have to remember, colleagues of ours put a lot into over successive governments, including our good friend Paul Murphy.
Thank you, Ranka Davies, for that. And I agree with him that the most striking advantage that we will see from a Biden presidency is the re-engagement of the United States in those huge international issues and organisations, which it used to be such a reliable partner in and has ceased to be so over the last few years. So the fact that it will re-engage with the World Health Organization will mean that its ability and the world's ability to deal with coronavirus will be strengthened. The fact that it will not now turn its back on the Paris Climate Accord will be good news not just for the United States but for the whole of the world. And that is the most striking thing that I think you see from outside the United States as being to the benefit of us all. We will use our international offices, of course, to continue to engage both in economic opportunities for Wales, cultural links between Wales and different parts of the United States, but also the political links that we need to build with the incoming administration. I think I said last week, shall we, that the Welsh caucus on Capitol Hill is to be reformed. My colleague, the former First Minister, visited the caucus, met people involved in it, and I look forward to the day when ministerial visits to different parts of the world, and particularly the United States, are available once again, because that will allow us to take forward even faster the international strategy we debated last week, with the envoys that we have been able to appoint, 2 of them in the United States, the diaspora that we know is there in the United States, willing to help us to keep Wales's profile high there and to engage on all that agenda that Hugh Ranker-Davies set out in his supplementary question.
Darren Miller.
First Minister, last week marked World Kindness Day, and there are members of your own party, you included, who've advocated a kinder politics. But kindness is not something that the left have given to Donald Trump during his time as President of the United States. Do you agree with me that no matter who the President of the United States is, that it is important that members of this chamber, including those heckling on your backbenches right now, must not make petty personal attacks that we've seen against people like Donald Trump over the past 4 years, and should instead practice what they preach?
Well, I'd be able to provide a different sort of answer to the member if I thought that the President to whom he referred for a moment took the advice that Darren Miller has offered, eschewing petty personal attacks. Have you never seen the tweets that that man has poured out during the 4 years, and the vile abuse that he has heaped on the heads of people who disagree with him? And when he refers to kindness, I think of those 500 children who will now probably never see their parents again. And that was the direct cause of actions that that man insisted on in the United States. And I won't use the word kindness when I refer to the previous President of the United States, while I still have those 500 children in my mind.
Question 5, John Griffiths.
Diolch, Llywydd. What further steps will the Welsh Government take to combat the harms resulting from COVID-19 in Newport?
Harms from COVID-19 in Newport are best addressed through measures we can take together to reduce contact with others, travel only when necessary, and work from home as much as possible. The Welsh Government plans actively for new vaccination and mass testing possibilities, including their availability to Newport citizens.
First Minister, I had a look around the new Aneurin Bevan University Health Board Grange Hospital last week. It officially opened today, but its birthing centre had already seen its first delivery, a baby girl fittingly born 2 days ago on Aneurin Bevan's birthday. Will you agree with me that this state-of-the-art facility is a very welcome addition to NHS capacity to serve generations to come, as well as having a vital role to help combat COVID-19, and in assisting the frontline NHS effort against the virus, will you carefully consider enhanced testing for asymptomatic domiciliary care staff and enhanced testing in our secondary schools, which would also reduce lost school time?
Well, can I thank John Griffiths for that question, Llywydd, and particularly for what he said at the start. I'd very much like to congratulate, and I'm sure members here would, Poppy and her parents, the first child to be born at the new hospital and to be born on Aneurin Bevan's birthday. What a fantastic start for the hospital and for that family. And it's a sign of what is to come from that state-of-the-art hospital in a scale and size and purpose, the single most important hospital since the University of Hospital here in Cardiff was opened at the beginning of the 1970s. And it will do a very, very important job over this winter in helping us to deal with the coronavirus crisis, with the hundreds of extra beds that it provides in that part of Wales, but in the longer run, in fulfilling the Gwent Clinical Futures vision, which I know John Griffiths, as the local member, will have been much involved in nearly a decade ago, when that was being planned and produced. And it's a very proud moment, I think, for us here in Wales to have seen that facility open ahead of time and available to that local population. And it will be an important part, Llywedd, of the way in which that facility and health services more generally in the Gwent area will be able to develop over this winter by using some of the new mass testing possibilities. And, you know, as in so much of coronavirus, this is happening very rapidly around us all the time. And we're likely to have thousands of these lateral flow tests available to us in Wales every day in the very near future. And that will give us new possibilities in asymptomatic testing of frontline workers, and may be able to do more to allow children who at the moment have to go home if a single child is found to have coronavirus in a school. We may be able to deploy them to allow those children to return more rapidly to education. So there's a lot of work going on with our colleagues in the Health Service and others to make sure that this new possibility is put to work in those parts of Welsh society where it has the most impact. And Llywedd, we've talked previously on the floor of the Senedd here about using them to enable visits to care homes. You know, one of the really, really difficult issues that families have had to face over this extraordinary period.
Laura Ann Jones.
Thank you, First Minister. We'd also, on these benches, like to extend our congratulations to, I believe it's baby Poppy's parents, and also welcome the hospital, which of course is hugely beneficial to all my constituents across South Wales East. There have been many concerns that people have been inboxing me about recently, because doctors have come out and said that they're concerned about the staffing levels in the new hospital for when it's opening. How can you reassure this floor today, First Minister, that there will be enough staff to cope with the demand when the hospital opens its doors? Thank you.
Well, shall we thank Laura Ann Jones for what she said originally. Of course, the hospital has already opened its doors. It's been receiving patients for some days now. I saw an exchange of correspondence between the medical director and one doctor employed by the Health Board, which I think set out very clearly the way in which staffing arrangements have been agreed with clinicians, agreed with the nursing leadership in the Health Board. Those staffing arrangements have been put in place. It's not to say for a moment, Llywedd, that the system is not under pressure. The health service is under pressure absolutely everywhere, right across the United Kingdom and most of Europe as well. And that is certainly true here in Wales. But working within those pressures, plans have been drawn up. They've been agreed with the people who need to operate them, and they are being put in place as this hospital receives its first patients.
Question 6, Mike Hedges.
Diolch, Llywedd. What action is the Welsh Government taking to alleviate poverty in Wales?
Thank Mike Hedges. Llywedd, the Welsh Government is focused on those practical actions which maximise income and reduce essential living costs. In this term, we have introduced the only nationally funded and designed holiday hunger programme in the United Kingdom, and in January, we will provide the first ever help with breakfast costs for children entering secondary school.
Can I thank the First Minister for that response? We all remember when employment used to be the way out of poverty. But we know now there are a lot of families with people working, in fact, both parents, in some cases, both parents who are working, who are living in poverty. We also see the £20 per week uplift in working tax credit being ended in April by the Westminster Government. What is the Welsh Government doing to end exploitative contracts paying less than the real living wage on either 0-hour or low guaranteed hours contracts for those directly or indirectly funded by the Welsh taxpayer?
Well, thank Mike Hedges for that, and he returned to the point that I made earlier this afternoon, Llywedd, that in terms of in-work poverty, universal credit was meant to be the solution to in-work poverty. It's not turned out to be, of course, because it was never funded generously enough to make it so. It has a marginal tax rate of 63%. So if you are a poor working family and you earn an extra £1, you get to keep 37 pence of it. It's not much of an inducement, is it, to make your way further into the world of work. And this year, we have the additional difficulty of the Chancellor's refusal to confirm that the additional £20 each week to universal credit will be carried on beyond the end of this financial year. And as I said, 35% of non-pensioner households in Wales are set to lose over £1,000 a year through that change of policy. I hear noises off, as you do in the Chamber. They would be better directed to supporting those families than to making the sort of remarks I was overhearing. How do we act? Mike Hedges Act? Well, we act ourselves. The NHS in Wales became a living wage employer when I was the Health Minister and has been ever since. We use our economic contract to make sure we're promoting fair work wherever Welsh Government public money is provided. We act with others. The Social Partnership Council will launch the Workplace Rights campaign before the end of this month, and that will be another way in which we can act to deal with in-work poverty, and we support the campaigning work of others. I was privileged to be able to launch our Living Wage Week here in Wales on Monday of last week, and it was, in a difficult year, very encouraging to hear all universities in Wales are now living wage employers. The Welsh Local Government Association has been accredited this year as a living wage employer, and Cardiff Council has an ambition to make Cardiff a living wage city in a way that is an inspiration to many other cities across the whole of the United Kingdom.
Cwestiwn 7 wedi dynnu nôl, yn ola fe.
Question 7's withdrawal. Finally, question 8, Helen Mary Jones.
Questions has the First Minister had about the waiting lists for surgery in the Hywel Dda University Health Board?
Thank Helen Mary Jones for that question. With Hywel Dda Health Board has made steady progress over recent years to reduce waiting times for planned surgery and diagnostics. The impact of the coronavirus and the necessary diversion of clinical resources to respond to it has had an inevitable impact on waiting times, despite the enormous efforts of frontline staff.
I'm grateful to the First Minister for his reply, and of course I associate myself with what he said about the huge efforts that frontline staff have been making in the hospitals and community settings across the Hywel Dda area. But the need for the restoration of ongoing regular treatments is becoming more and more urgent. One of my constituents, Colin Jones from Llanelli, has described being in terrible pain since his GP referred to him for a possible hip replacement. It hasn't even been possible for him to see the consultant yet to find out if that's the right way forward. So understanding the difficulties that there are in providing for those, well, it doesn't feel routine to Colin, I suppose, but for those out with COVID treatments. What further work can the Welsh Government do to help Hywel Dda University Health Board and health boards across Wales to get those elective surgery waiting lists further down?
Well, Llywyd, I have to repeat something of an answer I gave earlier, which is to say that the single most important thing that we can all do to help our health boards right across Wales is to do everything we can to stem the flow of coronavirus patients into those hospitals. 21% of all hospital admissions last week were for coronavirus, up from 19% the week before. And while that continues, it inevitably drives down the capacity of the system to do non-coronavirus work. So the most important thing we can do is to do everything that we are asking people to do to bear down on coronavirus, because that will allow the health service to do what it has been doing right through the summer, which is to restore the levels of non-coronavirus work back to where they were, well, as much as possible to where they were before coronavirus hit. We're not back to those levels, and that is because, as I know the member understands, that even when clinicians are attending to non-coronavirus work, they are working in conditions to prevent the risk of coronavirus that compromises the ability to the productivity rate that was previously possible in the health service. What the Welsh Government is doing beyond everything we try to do to bear down on coronavirus itself is to support clinicians in the very difficult job that they do of having to clinically prioritise the people who need their attention. And that is a desperately difficult message to give to the individual that Helen Mary Jones referred to. But there will be people with even greater clinical need. And in Wales, I don't think we would ever want to step back from that basic principle that those who need the help the most get to the front of the queue.
Diolch i'r Prif Weinidog.
Thank you, First Minister. The next questions are to the Deputy Minister and Chief Whip, and the first question is from David Rees.
Diolch, I just apologise for that. I was waiting for the prompt. What discussions is the Deputy Minister having with the third sector organisations regarding funding in the light of the impact of COVID-19 on their operation?
I have regular conversations with the third sector. At my recent Third Sector Partnership Council meeting, third sector networks reported on the impact of COVID-19 on their operations. In particular, the decision by the UK Government not to extend the furlough scheme during our fire break.
Thank you for that answer, Deputy Minister. I'm sure you agree with me that the voluntary sector and the local authorities working together have been hugely supportive of our communities during the COVID-19 pandemic. And without their support, many people will have had great difficulties getting through this difficult time. But we are still going ahead with more need as we face the winter months, and self-isolation has created self-loneliness in situations of desperate need for many people, and therefore the voluntary sector will be required to step up once again over this period of time. But funding becomes a serious challenge in this situation. What funding streams are you looking at to ensure that those organisations can get the money to ensure that they're able to provide the voluntary sector needed to deliver on the COVID-19 needs?
Well, thank David Rees for that question, and to also agree with him that the way in which the voluntary sector, and indeed volunteers particularly, have come forward in response to the pandemic and shown the sort of care and compassion that they displayed in particularly at the height of the pandemic during the lockdown, but since then, and if we look now that we've got 34,229 registered volunteers on our Volunteering Wales platform, with over 20,000 of those registered since the 1st of March. But the third sector is supporting that great swell of enthusiasm and support from volunteers. So that's why I announced the Welsh Government's £24 million COVID-19 third sector support fund back in April. And we've made supporting the sector during the pandemic a priority of this government. And of course, the sector will play a key role if we're to see a fair and just recovery from the coronavirus pandemic. And I do also urge charity and third sector organisations who still need support to explore the funding available that we had from the third sector resilience and the voluntary services recovery funds. I mean, it's just to finally conclude on the point in terms of your constituency, Neath Talbot Council of Voluntary Services has received £215,997 in Welsh Government funding this year, and that includes additional support from the Infrastructure Enabling Fund.
Question 2, Dawn Bowden.
Will the Deputy Minister provide an update on recent priorities for the international relations work of the Welsh Government?
We've just published International Relations Actions Plans, which set out the short and medium-term priorities for delivering on the international strategy. We're focusing on key initiatives to showcase Wales and demonstrate that we're an outward-facing and globally responsible nation.
Thank you, Deputy Minister, and can I wish you well with these new aspects of your portfolio. Now, last week, the First Minister set out the Welsh Government strategy for Wales' place in the world and the important relationships that we're seeking to deliver for the future. Since that time, we've seen two significant events. First, the unsavoury events surrounding the outgoing President of the United States, who continues to bring disgrace to that great office that he will soon have to vacate. Despite this, however, I hope the Welsh Government is working to support a smooth transition of power, and I welcome the First Minister's letters to both President Biden and especially Vice President Kamala Harris, congratulating them on their victory. But secondly, much closer to home, the utter chaotic scenes at the heart of the UK Tory government over the last week, culminating in COVID spreading around the PM and ending with his inflammatory comments about devolution, comments on which, by the way, the Welsh Tories have been virtually silent. But Deputy Minister, at this critical time, do you agree with me that the behaviours on display in and around number 10 Downing Street, just like in the USA, demean government and are a total distraction from the important issues that need to be resolved in the coming days and weeks in order to help Wales and the wider UK family of nations to face the post-Brexit future with confidence?
Well, thank you, Don Bowden, for raising those very important questions. And of course, the peaceful transfer of power is a critical element to any democracy, and a smooth transition is even more critical given the times we're in and the need for the incoming administration to prepare and meet the challenge of coronavirus. Of course, it has been widely recognised and supported that our First Minister recently wrote to congratulate President-elect Joe Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris. And I do echo these congratulations. I'm sure we all do, and particularly the fact that the US has the first female Vice President, who will also be the first Asian American, the first African American Vice President. That's a huge source and a result which has raised great hope, particularly amongst American people, but across the world. But I think the fact that they the President and Vice President-elect stood on a platform of fighting for equality, tackling racism, and also tackling climate change and fighting coronavirus so strongly echoes what Wales holds dear. And I, of course, foresee that our relationship with the USA will be a prosperous one. But your second part of your question, I'm afraid I'm filled with much less optimism, because our focus and the focus of the UK government must be on these incredibly difficult times we're in. In Wales, we're focused as ever on the health and well-being of the nation. We won't be distracted from that, and neither should the UK government allow itself to be distracted. But the news overnight of the Boris Johnson's remarks on devolution, the points that have been echoed in this chamber this afternoon, really show that the lack of engagement on EU and transition particularly, but also engagement on how we are working together as 4 nations to tackle the coronavirus, does make us more concerned than ever. Chaos in Westminster worsening, I would say, post-Cummings, when we need collaboration, we need respect for Wales, the Senedd, and the powers that we're exercising here to keep Wales safe.
Question 3.
Thank you, Llywydd. What assessment has the Deputy Minister made of the impact of COVID-19 on the voluntary sector in Wales?
The sector's response to the crisis has shown the strength and depth of the sector. It has also highlighted the importance of a strong and resilient third sector, which is why I have established the Third Sector Partnership Council Recovery Group to ensure a fair, just and green recovery.
Thank you for that response, and I note the response you gave earlier to David Rees. I want to ask specifically about the situation of environmental bodies in Wales. Like a number of other organisations, they're facing difficulties often because their sites are a source of revenue, have had to close. Also, membership is suffering, given that individuals tend to cut back because of the wider economic situation. But these economic organisations and bodies are delivery partners, which are very important to Welsh Government when it comes to a broad range of projects and programmes related to tackling the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis that we are facing in Wales. And it's becoming more and more difficult for those bodies because of the loss of core funding, mainly, to play a full role in that work. And I want to know what you're doing specifically from the point of view of the environmental voluntary sector, because if we're talking about having a green recovery, then we will be starting from a further point than we would wish, unless some of these bodies get the support that they need.
I'm grateful to Claire Griffiths for that specific focus on the environmental third sector. I'm also recognising, of course, that as well as tackling and responding to the coronavirus, we've also had the flooding, and that, of course, has had a huge environmental impact. And the third sector, again, rose to, the volunteers rose to respond to that. But I think the £24 million to support the Wales voluntary sector has reached out to as many of those charities, not just those who are perhaps more focused on health, social care and housing, but also to those in the environmental sector. We have the Third Sector Resilience Fund, £1 million. That's helping third sector organisations who are financially through the crisis, and I think that's a key point you make. Those who perhaps also have seen, many have seen a fall in their fundraising, donation income. In fact, fund to date supported 112 organisations with awards totalling 4.63 million. And I will get specific information about how many of those are in the environmental sector, because I believe those are the ones who we need to see take us through forward in terms of their crucial work, particularly tackling climate change. But I think also our Voluntary Sector Services Recovery Fund is about how we can move forward, focusing on reducing inequalities across society as a result of COVID-19, and many communities suffering disproportionately. Enabling them to look forward in terms of recovery is the purpose of that fund, which is also supporting many organisations across Wales.
Cwestiwn 4, Jenny Rathbone.
Will the Deputy Minister make a statement on the impact of the coronavirus pandemic on the Gypsy and Traveller community?
We've worked to support Gypsy and Traveller communities during the pandemic to address issues related to employment, education, digital exclusion, healthcare, utilities provision and communication.
The most recent report on the impact of COVID on the Romani and Traveller community this month, called Moving for Change, highlights the suffering of this community because they are mainly low-income families which rely heavily on work in construction, both on building sites as well as on people's homes, doing roofing repairs, tarmac laying and landscape gardening, etc. Of course, they're not the only self-employed community who've suffered financially. Taxi drivers, musicians and theatre workers face similar destitution, frankly, as only those in employment have been eligible for the job retention scheme. Additionally, low literacy levels and poor internet connectivity on traveller sites makes it very challenging for the Gypsy and Traveller community to understand what they might be eligible for in the way of self-employed support from the Welsh Government's Economic Resilience Fund. What has the Welsh Government done to reach out to this most disadvantaged of communities?
Thank Jenny Rathbone for that question. I do welcome the Romani Cultural and Arts Company report, the impact of the novel coronavirus pandemic upon Romani and traveller communities in Wales 2020, and many insights and recommendations from that report that we're now considering alongside other evidence to inform work, very relevant as well to our Race Equality Action Plan. So we are looking now, we funded the Romani Cultural and Arts Company to undertake additional community engagement to support the plan's development and to make sure that we're engaging with the views of the community. But I think the Welsh Government continuing to fund the Travelling Ahead project to provide a range of services to Gypsy, Roma and Traveller communities in Wales is crucial, and they have helped those in self-employment to access UK government schemes, including the Coronavirus Self-Employment Income Support Scheme, and also those facing extreme financial hardship, which of course you recognise them in that community. The advisors have assisted in completing applications to the Discretionary Assistance Fund, described earlier, of course, by the First Minister. And we've ensured that those who have got the expertise and access to Gypsy, Roma and Traveller communities are engaging with them. But I'm also very pleased that we have funded through the Voluntary Services Emergency Fund, and we have funded a helpline to provide an accessible first port of call for information for the BAME COVID-19 helpline. It is on a range of issues, including employment and welfare, education, housing, personal safety and health issues. And of course that also we will be reaching out to Gypsy, Roma, Traveller communities to make sure that also local authorities are taking their responsibilities seriously in terms of access to learning and indeed improvements to ensure that broadband is available.
Question 5 wedi...
Question 5 was withdrawn, so thank you, Deputy Minister. The next item is the business statement and